Good, Kevy? All right, if I can figure this out. I win. There we go. I am standing here to make Times New Roman great again. Because, if I'm being quite honest, it has a bit of a shit reputation. So, my name, as everybody has already said, is Kyle Asperger. I am the founder of 301 Original. On Instagram, we're at 301 Original, so please follow us. I have my phone on me at all times, and I'm uber easy to get a hold of. 301original.com, and if you have questions, comments, complaints, shoot me an email at kyle@301original.com. I am happy to hear anything from you. 301 Original bridges the gap between brands and their audience, as your audience needs to know your flavor. So essentially, we help you to refine that interaction through consumer-centric photography and design. Now, 301 Original is sort of the compilation of my whole sort of professional work history. It started somewhere around 5 years ago when I moved from Chicago to Columbus. So first place I started was Print Syndicate, then swiftly moving to Abbott Nutrition, Victoria's Secret, Bath & Body Works, Warhol and Wall Street, and then it was shortly after that that 301 Original came to life. A lot of it really stemmed from my experience at Warhol and Wall Street. As the design agency that it is, I was there for about a year and a half, and they had me doing pretty heavily graphic design and photography especially, whereas at most of the previous spots I was doing primarily just graphic design work. With Warhol and Wall Street, what I was really looking to do was sort of segue up into that role of creative director. The problem was that no one in the office really had the experience or knowledge to sort of mentor me up into that position. So what they suggested was, hey, hop on LinkedIn, find some local individuals that have that like creative direction experience, hit them up, message them, ask them for coffee, and so that's pretty much exactly what I did. So as much as I like to joke with Kev that we met on Grindr, what I really did was I hit him up on LinkedIn. So it's like the professional Grindr. So I like low-key think it's a dating app. I don't really know. Use it however you like. I'm not here for that. But Kev then suggested, hey, you know, I'm one of the founders of Columbus Web Group, which, by the way, I totally botched this, but I want to say thank you to all of the organizers. Also, Sean Duran is our kind of subtle angel investor tonight. He bought all the food. So thank you, Sean. We love you dearly. I don't know where you are right now, but why aren't you here? So essentially Kev said, hey, you know, come out to Columbus Web Group. You know, we've been doing this for a while. It's a great, extraordinarily diverse group of people, which it still is. I mean, look around you. I'm still kind of blown away at the number of interests, races, occupation, everything is all over the place, and it still kind of blows my mind at like how Web Group actually draws this crowd. But essentially, I would attribute in large part my attendance to Web Group. And this kind of goes back to what Jay was talking about last month for anybody that saw Jay Klaus's talk. But he essentially said, the more you show up in the room, people generally start to expect to see you. And so because of that, I would actually attribute a lot of that to why I'm actually talking at you right now. But that in large part was and is what 301 Original is. I've made a lot of contacts, and many of those people I've either worked with, have been significant mentors for me and my business, or have just been great friends along the way. All of it started way, way, way back in grade school, though. And I should preface this with the fact that I had a little bit of a twisted sense of humor, and mind you, anybody that knows me today can still vouch for that. I loved to draw fire, like just everywhere. So my teachers would get my homework, and it just fire was all over the place. And so I actually ended up learning this like long after the fact, but my mom apparently got a call from one of my teachers one day, and the teacher was like, what is going on at home? Like, is everything okay? We're kind of worried that Kyle's gonna like low-key burn down the school. And my mom's like, well, he's great at drawing fire. I don't see what the problem is. Because casual parenting. So from a very young age, we all knew that I was going to be something in that kind of creative field. We just, at the time, didn't quite know how that would come to life. But here we are with today's agenda. Again, Kyle Asperger. Obviously, we are here to talk about my love, my sweet, sweet love. Ooh, it's like the Wolf of Wall Street. Sorry. All right. Times New Roman. I will talk basic typographic terms to hopefully help kind of bridge the gap between any non-designers in the crowd, just to help you kind of get an idea of what us actual designers really kind of fuss about on a regular basis. Walk through a few different type crimes, just common misuses that I see. I'll kind of open up to graphic design and then tie everything into show how all of it really comes together to form a brand and the overall importance of maintaining a brand. And I will leave you with my reading list for any discerning typophiles in the crowd. Now, Times New Roman, I can guarantee that everybody in this room, except maybe the dude that didn't know who Martha Stewart was, everybody has had some kind of interaction with it. Whether it's through PowerPoint, your teacher saying, give me the essay by Friday, double space, Times New Roman, all that stuff. We have that ricocheting in the back of our heads. I still do, at least. But everybody generally talks about it in the negative, which is a shame.
Times New Roman is horse shit.
Thank you, Steve. Your input is valuable. The moral of the story is simple. It's that Times New Roman over the years has, in a way, become the default font, in that if you open up a new computer, chances are Times New Roman is going to be loaded up on there. So it is the first come, first serve, early bird special. It's always there. And so because of that, when graphic designers are considering how to essentially formulate a brand and target specific messages to whatever the audience is that that brand is looking to resonate with, designers have this sort of hipster mentality of, well, everybody's using Times New Roman, so why would I? It's considered almost devoid of character and just no one likes to use it. So Stanley Morrison designed Times New Roman back in 1929 for the British publication literally called The Times, which ironically was falling behind the times, because what Stanley noted was that it was kind of out of date, it was a little drab, and it could certainly have been improved upon as far as the legibility is concerned. So in 1929, when Stanley went ahead and designed Times New Roman, he had just a few goals in mind. In that, A, he wanted to somewhat modernize the brand, bring it into its modern day of the 1930s. In that, he also had to consider the fact that it is a newspaper, it's a publication. A lot of people read the news, on the way to work, so they don't have too much time, so they don't want to have to struggle to actually read the text. So Times New Roman and serifed fonts in general, which I will also kind of touch on a few things I'm going to talk about right now a little bit later on, but Times New Roman is inherently an extraordinarily legible font. Some of the kind of key factors here that really kind of add to its overall legibility are the fact that its letter forms are generally thicker, so that at a smaller size, it can be still really easily read. Also, the interior shapes that you see in like the E, the O, A, for instance, the larger that those interior shapes are, those also add very significantly to the overall legibility. Also, a quick note too, that because it's a publication, there is only so much literal real estate on the page that a story can actually be told. So oftentimes publications will like to employ a slightly more condensed font, because then that way you can literally fit more information into a smaller space. So as far as the goal that Stanley Morrison had in mind, which was bring some more life to this publication, provide an extraordinarily legible font, and be able to fit in more story, he hit the nail on the head. So, great job, man. You done good. So here are some examples. The one on the left, Fun Guy and Real Ones Know, was actually brought to my attention by a good buddy of mine, Danny, here in the front row. I have to bring out my cheat sheet for this one because this is related to sports ball. And if it's not otherwise obvious, I don't. So the designer of these shirts, his name's Alex Center. And now apparently New Balance either did or they still have a contract with I believe he's a basketball player named Kawhi Leonard. Kawhi. Thank you, Stephen. Told you I don't sports ball. So Alex said, Fun Guy, Real Ones Know, in Times New Roman. But the reason that I find this to be actually a really interesting kind of case study here is because Kawhi, I'm a quick learner here, Kawhi had a kick-ass following. And so I don't know if they were just like winning all the games, whatnot, but the second that New Balance dropped, I don't know, they did good. The second they dropped this line of shirts, people flocked to the New Balance site so quickly that they actually ended up crashing the website. And I mean, yeah, Times New Roman for the win. Thank you. Also, Talking Heads, Psycho Killer album cover, very simple use of Times New Roman, italic, cheat sheet away. And of course, I had to give it my own cute little twist here with my senior citizen dating app named Ember. Online dating seems to be a thing in my world. My thought process, though, was Times New Roman, it's been around for a bit. Old people have been around for a bit. It's never too late to spark a fling. And so I kind of figured, Times New Roman is a very familiar font. Oftentimes serif fonts are considered to be more elegant, so I kind of wanted it to resonate with them in that sense, but still be welcoming and friendly, so hence why I kept everything lowercase. Plus, I wanted to give our little love-struck fella here an opportunity to use the R as a walker as he's finding its way to his new love. So again, Stanley Morrison designed Times New Roman back in 1929 for the Times. Modernized the publication, also just created a kick-ass typeface font, excuse me. Minor slip up there, sorry designers. A font that stood the test of time. Now, typography is what language looks like. I'm going to put my little teacher hat on here for just a second, and this is sort of in hopes that all of the non-designers in the crowd, developers, if you don't consider yourself a designer, this will hopefully give you a better idea of what it is that designers like myself like to fuss over all the time, like the nitty-gritty stuff. So these basic typographic terms, stems, ligatures, kerning, tracking, and leading. First off, stems. They are the main, usually vertical stroke of a letter form. And so any letter is called a letter form or a character. But pretty much every letter in the English language has a stem, minus the truly organic letter forms like S's, O's, for example. Ligatures. Now, these are two or more letters that are joined together to form one glyph or character. These are generally found only in the expert or pro font packages because the designer of the font literally has to design these special characters. So, thank you. Am I too boring for you? Oh, Kyle's kind of moving slow. Let's give him booze. And so oftentimes, those expert and pro font packages, you have to pay a little bit more, aka potentially thousands of dollars, if you're going to employ one of those fonts to use as your brand. For instance, if you get a ton of traffic to your website like New Balance did. Kerning, it is the adjustment of space between two letters. Now, somewhat on the opposite end here, if you've ever been on duffont.com, that's where you get all the coolest fonts, totally for free, because nobody puts time into designing them. The designers should if they care about their font, they should put in what's called a kerning table. And that essentially informs the proper amount of spacing between letters. So if you download a free font, it generally does not come with a proper kerning table. There will be some awkward spacing that designers have to go in and just manually adjust. Now, similar yet different, tracking, it is the overall space of a group of letters. This is generally only applied to headlines and logos. And last but not least, leading, it is the distance between one line of type to another. And to give you the history or context here, this goes back to the 1400s when Johannes Gutenberg was bringing the printing press to Europe. They would have to set little blocks of type. So each little block had one letter or punctuation mark. So after that entire line of text, all the blocks are set. To separate one line from the next, they would literally have to put strips of lead in there to create as much or as little space as they wanted. But the goal is just to make sure that the line of type is not bumping up on the line above it. Serif versus sans serif, the question of the hour here. As I was talking with Ember, oftentimes serif fonts are considered more elegant. I would also like to point out that oftentimes we see that publications, magazines, or novels even are set in a serif font. And that's because that the serifs help improve legibility so much so that when you have those dense bodies of text, it's easier for the human eye to move throughout them. Now, sans serif, there are as many, if not even more, truly legible sans serif fonts. And if you think about it from the perspective of somebody who is visually impaired or even a child, if they are looking to learn the English language, oftentimes they read books that are set in sans serif fonts and typefaces just because the letter forms themselves are more recognizable. That and again, oftentimes you see them set for headlines and logos. But really the moral of the story is that there is no cut and dry, do this or do that, don't do this, don't do that. What it really comes down to is the audience that you are trying to connect with and the message that you are looking to portray with them. Now, this is a spread from Wired magazine, which for me is design porn. It is an excerpt from a Nike article, actually. And so what I'd like to point out first is that the lines, the grid, I put those in after the fact just to show, because graphic design is a very grid-based art form. It is the presentation of information directed to a very specific audience or market, whatever you are looking to resonate with. And in this case, it is anybody that wears Nike shoes. So first off, what we're seeing is that the body copy here adheres very strictly to the grid. It is set in a serif typeface, and so because of that, when you're designing out body copy, you never want to sacrifice any ounce of legibility. So hence why it's so strictly adhering to the grid. Very little has been done to it to essentially make it pretty. Where they really said, you know what, we can kind of think outside the box here is with the header, the perfect fit, as well as the call out, what about a shoe that would essentially come alive when you put it on? This is where the designer said, you know what, we have the body copy, it's within the grid, but because it's street, you're not exactly abiding by the rules, a little edgier. I should mind, I actually totally didn't know what J's meant when I was at Warhol on Wall Street, and they totally busted my ass for this, because J's apparently are short for Jordans. So I don't know that much about shoes, aside from the fact that they live on your feet. So I'm not the best spokesman for this, but very street, a little bit more edgy. And so that's what the designers decided to do with this layout, is sort of engage outside of the grid, kind of play around with it. And so in doing so, the layout itself resonates with the target market, whoever the reader is, and contextually, as well as the images, everything just works together. So to fire back through those basic terms for the non-designers, we had stems, ligatures, kerning, tracking, and leading. Good job, Kyle. I can remember 5 words in a certain order. And graphic design is the presentation of information to a very specific audience. And the two always go hand in hand together. Now, type crimes, some common typographic mistakes, some of which I've seen actually quite recently. But first, as I'm sure many of you speculated, I have to talk about Comic Sans. Does anybody in the crowd actually remember this dog? Martha Stewart guide? Don't answer this. Anybody raise your hand if you do? Awesome. Okay, cool. All right, no one knew that. So, this goes back to the early days of Microsoft computers, in that this cute little pup would pop up and give you, so we got one here. All right, one winner. Well, I'll talk to you after that. But this dog would pop up and give you some useful little tips on how to navigate the user interface of Microsoft computers. Now, Vincent Conair, who designed Comic Sans, was literally quoted in saying, "A comic dog would not talk in Times New Roman." To which I would say, I fucking agree. The two don't go together. Times New Roman is a very rigid font. Yes, it's incredibly legible, but when you have a little dog that's giving useful tips, you want it to be friendly, you want it to be approachable. Hey, here's what you gotta do, barf, barf, dog stuff. I don't know. So what he did in designing Comic Sans is he gave the dog proper flavor, contextual flavor. So just like Stanley Morrison did with Times New Roman in serving the publication, Vincent Conair designed a proper typeface for our little comic dog here. Now the problem is, fonts like Comic Sans, Times New Roman, Papyrus have all been insanely overused. They end up in places like flyers, thankfully not on Bud Light cans, flyers, billboards, websites, everywhere that the message and the audience, they fail to see the resonance, because essentially the font that you use has to do entirely with the message that you are looking to portray. So that's in large part why fonts like these are poo-pooed on so much. Back to type crimes. Type crime number one, oftentimes, and I've seen this within the last week, people will take a line of type and squish it to fit in a smaller space. Now, what I designed this in is Gotham Bold, which Gotham itself is a very wide font. It's very geometric. The O is almost a perfect circle. And so essentially the solution here is to maintain the integrity of the original design of the font and use a condensed font. Designers design fonts specifically to fit in smaller spaces. So this here example is Futura condensed, set in 34 point. This will make your layout look so much more professional, so much cleaner. Just do this, everybody's totally cool with it. Type crime number two, too close for comfort. Do not combine fonts that are too similar. Now, at a passing glance, there is almost no discernible difference between these two fonts. They are actually two different fonts. On top, we have Baskerville Regular. On the bottom, we have Big Caslon Medium. They are very similar, and there is very little hierarchy because of that. Generally speaking, when you're laying out anything typographically speaking, you want to maintain a level of hierarchy. Because if you call out, for instance, the header, just like junior high dances, make sure there's enough visible difference between the two fonts for your typography Jesus. On top, we're using Debbie Script. On the bottom, Baskerville again. These two fonts play quite nicely together. Debbie Script being a little bit more fun, a little bit more inviting, kind of feminine. Baskerville, again, much more similar to Times New Roman, for instance. Rigid, very legible, and elegant in presentation. So what we're doing is we're creating hierarchy. We are calling out the headline or the subhead so that the reader can say, great, here's what I'm interested, and then those essentially pull them into whatever the rest of the article, blog post, yada yada, cool beans. Developers, whenever you guys geek out about all your shit, that's like what I think about from The Matrix. And how this really all relates back to you if you don't consider yourself a designer. When graphic designers are going through and establishing the typographic standards for a brand, there is a lot of thought and effort that goes into setting those different standards. The rules are there for a reason, because a brand is considered to be most professional when it is consistent throughout every single platform. So the key is to understand why every decision has been made, why all the different typefaces exist, and going back to kerning, line spacing, letter spacing, all that stuff. The terminology may be a bit different as far as how it actually translates, but the way that it still affects the type and the text is the exact same. So understand, talk with your designer, and do your gosh darndest to make sure that that brand is consistent through all of the flyers, the billboards, the website, the app, as everybody will just consider the brand as a whole to be much more professional. So again, don't squish a line of text when there are otherwise fonts out there designed to fit in those more condensed spaces. Also, make sure you're maintaining hierarchy. Use two different yet ideally complementary fonts when laying out any text. Branding. A brand exists in the customer's head. It is the culmination of every single interaction that anybody has had ever with a brand. It could be from, I don't have a pen, but it could be literally a pen with a logo on there. It could be a conversation with a help hotline. Literally anything. That is how your brand is. Oh, no, go back. Hello, there we go. Yeah, it is a company's opportunity to explain their mission, talk about their values, and really ingrain themselves in the end user's head. Let's talk Jenny's. Great local brand. A lot of people know it, especially this month. They've been, putting a lot of like Nina West stuff out there for Pride Month. Talking more specifically about the logo itself. It's fun, it's welcoming. You want to say like, hey, come on in, let's hang out, have some kick-ass ice cream. It does speak to, like Jenny herself is very fun, very outgoing, very fashion-forward and elegant in presentation. So the logo itself speaks to her character. And a quick side note too about the logo, back in 2016, it was redesigned by Jessica Hitch, famous typographer. And she did a fantastic job with it. Now, if you actually saw or remember the logo as it was prior to her having her way with it, the changes weren't all that drastic. Essentially, it seems like she just kind of cleaned up the lines, made it a bit more cohesive logo. Now, another local brand, Powerhouse Gym. This one is set in slab serif here. So essentially, slab serif is just a boxier serifed font, connoting, power. You drink your protein, you go to rep, you do rep, you do rep, I go home now. It's a terrible Schwarzenegger. But I can't do the whole Austrian thing. I could do a little bit of British, but it wouldn't work. It's a great kind, and we're back. Okay. Powerhouse, Power, obviously, they have that kind of half-hearted, funny, silly illustration of the scarily jacked guy. So it's powerful yet inviting simultaneously. Coca-Cola and Pepsi, two of what I would argue as being the, Reed, I saw that yawn, drink more beer, fix that. Coca-Cola and Pepsi are two of the most well-known brands, I would argue, in the world. This is going to be a quick little story on how a brand has the power to beat out a superior product. Because back in the 90s, there was a group of scientists that decided to do a blind taste test. So they didn't tell any of the participants which was which, but they said, take a sip of each, and which one, who thinks Coke won out? Raise your hands. All right, we got 4. Everybody else that didn't raise their hands, you're right. Pepsi tasted better. Pepsi won hands down, won the blind taste test. Scientists said, great, we're gonna do this again, except they told the participants which was which. They said Coca-Cola is on the left, Pepsi is on the right, drink them down and tell us what you think. Now, this is interesting because Coca-Cola's brand had been around longer. They'd had an opportunity to connect with the hearts, the souls, the minds of American people and society as a whole. Like, they pretty much brought us freaking Santa. So because the participants knew which brand was which, they had that brand to fall back on and associate. So Coca-Cola won out far and away just because they could relate back to the brand. And again, we're reminded that Pepsi did in fact taste better, but nobody gives a shit if you have a better brand. So better brand could potentially beat out a superior product. That is the true power of branding. That is, if it is maintained throughout all platforms, consistency throughout all the years. So again, a brand exists in the mind of the consumer. It is every single interaction that anybody has had with a brand ever, which for the solopreneur in me is fucking terrifying. Takeaways here. What have we learned? Times New Roman was designed back in 1929. I've been an enthusiast for years, especially back when things were going really well for me. Stanley Morrison brought new life to the Times by modernizing it as well as providing it with an extraordinarily legible font that has literally stood the test of time. And that's also why it's been so overused and shat on so many times. We fired through some basic typographic terms for the non-designers in the crowd, so now hopefully you can sort of understand what it is that us designers actually freak out about all the time. That is, again, stems, ligatures, kerning, tracking, and leading. And again, a brand exists in the mind of the customer, so a solid brand that is maintained throughout the years that truly connects with its audience has the power to beat out a superior product if it is maintained and created as it should be. Now, as promised, my reading list for the discerning typophiles here in the crowd. Detail and typography, which I actually have right here. It is a quick read, but it is a very in-depth read. Feel free to snap pictures, whatever. It is a very deep dive into the intricate little details of typography. And then up next, Thinking with Type by Ellen Lupton. For anybody that would like to learn more about typography as a whole, it really does a great job of kind of talking about history and how it's informed the evolution of typography over the years, as well as doing a pretty great job of diving deep into the terminology and the intricacies. So that's sort of the most overarching read that you can find there. As mentioned earlier, Wired Magazine, Design Porn, the collaborators, the photographers, designers, illustrators. I would like to make a quick note too. Scott Dadich, who is the former editor, he left in February 2017. I think the way that he handled the publication just as a whole was extraordinary. So if you kind of dig deep down, back into the older issues, then you can find some really amazing publications there. And last but not least, we have Communication Arts, another publication. It's literally just the best of the best. They have Photography Annual, Design Annual, Typography Annual, Advertising Annual. They get everything. Very highly curated batch of creatives and projects, deliverables, all that stuff. So again, I am Kyle Asperger, founder of 301 Original. I urge you, please follow 301 at 301 Original on Instagram. I am always happy to chat with you about whatever it is that you're working on. I feel like I'm that uncle that just wants to see everybody win at whatever you're doing. So please, I want to help, and so does everybody here, the organizers especially. But I mean, look around you. This is a room full of those aunts and uncles that are just do good, whatever. The biggest part is that you're here. As Jay mentioned last month, show up, because I am simultaneously an uber introvert and an extrovert at times, so I would consider myself an ambivert, kind of right in the middle. For the introverts in the crowd, you are here, and that's the biggest thing. So please consider us all resources. Thank you to Kevin Mack, Steve Lynch, Andy Schofield, Sean Duran, angel food buyer. I'm totally missing other people. Everybody with Tech Elevator, big thank you to you guys for being such a big supporter of Columbus Web Group. But I hope I was able to make Times New Roman great again. If not, totally shit on it. I don't care. That's fine. Thank you.
All right.
Hi,
Now
Steve.
is time. Hello.
Now it's the time?
Now is time for question and answer. Before we move to question and answer, I'd like to give a big shout out and round of applause for our wonderful photographer for the evening. Everyone give a round of applause.
This is Jerron Murphy. He's a good buddy of mine, kick-ass photographer. Normally, most people know me as the photographer for this, but I can't really shoot my own talk. It'd be somewhat
Can I ask
counterproductive.
you to say words about yourself on your own behalf for your behalf?
Thanks, dude.
Just remember, it's 2019. Kyle may be a real man, but gender is a sliding scale.
I'm a real boy.
For yourself.
Why are we
Anyways.
sitting so far apart?
That's okay. I want people to see your face.
This is
So,
like the
one
distance,
question I have for you.
my therapist to me. I'm like, this is too far.
If you sit this far away from your therapist, that room's too big.
It's legal issues. It's okay.
So, first question for you is, I know you feel really strongly about photo critiques. It's like part of what you do. It's something that you feel really passionately about. So could you describe what photo critiques are, how you do them, and why they're useful?
Sure. It actually really stems back to design school. I went to Miami, Ohio, which ironically is known for its business school. So a lot of times when I actually talk about this, people just don't even know that Miami has an art school. It's small but mighty. But design critiques are a very critical part of the learning process, as you get a bunch of feedback from everybody else, stemming from the story to the pure execution of whatever your project is. But the same thing translates through fine art, photography, anything creative as a whole. This is oftentimes seen in the agency sector too. But commercial photography is a huge part of what I, with 301 Original, do. And it's something that no one ever did for me as I was learning photography. So essentially, it's me really just trying to help with, I have a very commercial-oriented approach. So the key is to, just understand everybody comes from their own place, so they're speaking from whatever their experience is. Thanks, dude. See you, bye. So it's a very critical part to the learning process, and regardless of whatever stage, like Alex, swung by one, Kev, Mike in the back, it's an awesome thing to do if you really just want to sort of up your photography game real quick.
So if someone wanted to join the photo critique that you run, how would they do that?
That would be a great thing to follow up with. Hop on Meetup. I have a Meetup for 301 Original. It's called 301 Original Workshop Series? Yeah. I think if you just type in 301 Original on Meetup, then you'll find it. But our next one is July 18th. So please absolutely come out. They're only $5, all of which is donated to a Chicago organization called Immerman Angels. And this kind of goes back to the mentorship that I have personally seen from a lot of the friends, and actually a good buddy of mine, Alex Bell, who's standing way, way uncomfortably far away from me now. Hi, Alex. But he's not only a good friend, but I would also consider him a personal mentor. For the meetups, he actually just spoke, when was that, last, 2 weekends ago? Yeah. And in that, he's like, dude, you should really find a charity or organization to reach and support. And so I thought about it, and you know what? My mom is a 2-time ovarian cancer survivor, which blows my mind to this day still. And so at one point or another, I was out at this networking event in Chicago. I met this guy named Johnny Immerman, who is one of the founders of Immerman Angels. So essentially what Immerman Angels does is they take current cancer survivors and link them up with people that are going through similar, if not the exact same, cancer treatments. And so those survivors then become these angels in that they essentially provide an opportunity for these cancer patients to talk through whatever they're going through or just essentially mentor them through their trials. And so my mom has had, I believe, 3 mentees as of now. But it's something that me with 301 Original, my baby, I would not be where I am without the mentorship of people like Kevin Mack, Mike Steiner, Alex Bell. All of these people I consider hardcore mentors for me, as well as some of my best friends. Some of my best friends. I said that real weird, sorry. So I like to have friends. So I look to support mentorship anywhere and everywhere that I can. So if anybody would like to chat with me about any interest in donating to Immerman to just continue these conversations going, please talk to me. I have some of their flyers up here if anybody would like more information on it. But we're doing what we can to support mentorship in all varieties, essentially.
Thank you. Second question is, one thing I know you also do a lot of is headshots. Anyone who follows you on Instagram or 301 Original knows that you do them and you do them quite well. So if someone were to get a headshot from you or want to get a headshot from you, where and how could they do that?
Instagram would be the easiest way. Hop on there. My studio is located downtown. It's my home office, home studio, so I shoot out of there as well. And so literally just hit me up. Sometimes if you're looking for more of a lifestyle kind of brand-oriented shoot, then it could be a little bit more extensive conversation on how can we better serve your brand. Or if you just need a quick, LinkedIn shot or something for online dating, then absolutely always reach out to me. Everybody needs a solid profile picture. Reed knows what I'm talking about.
So now, if any of you guys have questions, I'd be more than happy to field them from the audience. If you do so, we're going to make a request that you have to come to the front of the room. I did not love this idea when I heard it from Kevin, so I'm trusting in his belief that this is a rad idea. So trust me trusting Kevin, which makes a trust bridge. So if you have a question for Kyle, please raise your hand, and I will come seek you out.
Right now.
Oh, I love it. Alex, come up to the front. All the way to the front, like I literally just said. Everybody, Alex.
Hey, you're repping his web group shirt too.
So I'm curious because I'm very much like a words person or a numbers person. I just think, I don't know, more technically than creatively. So when I come across visual stuff, I'm mostly like, oh, it looks good, or oh, it doesn't look good. And that's about the extent of the critique that I can do. I'm curious, when it comes to typography in particular, how would you stack that up against other sort of important visual branding things? Like obviously you need a color palette, typography, iconography, graphics. Like if we have to choose and we can't get the whole thing and have the perfect brand to start out with, where would you put typography in level of importance compared to other things versus just, hey, look, let's just do Times New Roman because it's free, and we'll move on and spend money on other stuff.
Just do Times New Roman because it's free. That hurts so much. God. I'm going to say content is king. It doesn't matter. I mean, typography, obviously, make it legible. Make sure that your audience can literally read whatever your messaging is. But most importantly is that your messaging has to resonate with your audience. So I would almost say that I would take like a back seat to the importance of the written link, like, just make sure your message is good. If you have to essentially like stack like typography in there, like type is a very critical element, like iconography, it does help. It's a little bit more universal, I guess. So I would put it up there as one of the more important things. Like you just make sure your typography is shored up, and even if it's just a simple typographic logo, that's totally fine. That's what 301 original is. That's a total cop-out, because I don't know what, there's not like one like image or one thing that I feel truly describes 301. It's my home address. It is me. So I don't know. Like, type is important.
If you had to pick a beautiful typeface in an ugly color, or a beautiful color with an ugly typeface, what would you pick?
I'd go beautiful typeface in the ugly color.
Guys, you heard it here first. Beautiful typeface, ugly color. Finally got him to stack them.
As long as the colors are not like, you can't read them. Because there are certain, like, there's like a whole like psychology behind colors that, like Kyle Knapp is, nodding like, fuck yeah, there is. He's a killer illustrator too. So there's a lot of psychology and reasoning behind colors, typography, iconography. There is a lot of thought and time that goes into it.
Perfect. You heard it here. Beautiful typeface. Ugly color.
We got a question
as long
in the
as
back.
It's not light yellow. Question. Come up to the front.
Unless it's on
I'm
like
feeling
a
pretty good
rack or
today.
something.
6 out of 10. What is your name and what is your question?
My name is Burton. My question actually follows up with that. So when I go to pick out typefaces, I'll go on, websites and start looking through them, and I find it to be impossible to pick one or two or find the correct combinations. Like, is there a process you have to sort that out? Because I'll spend an hour on it and I'll end up with like 30 typefaces that I really like,
Yeah.
and I don't know what to choose.
The key, well, I had a communications professor back in the day that like her PowerPoint presentations were god awful because they would use 30 different fonts and the images would be squished. It was a mess. So the key, I can't say there's any cut and dry reasoning for the type that I decide to employ and the fonts, but don't use all 30 of them. Trim it down, just think like, if you really don't know where to start, just think what the most legible typefaces are, most legible fonts. A lot of it does, if you're doing like web design, you want to make sure that, for instance, if you're like printing out a flyer first, you want to make sure that whatever, fonts you're using are also available on the web. So that could be a great, really easy way to potentially just knock out some options. Because if you go on like, Adobe fonts or Google fonts and whatnot, and like, you may have to end up actually licensing some fonts that could cost your client thousands of dollars to do. So occasionally, if your budget doesn't have the room for that kind of thing, that could be indicative of, all right, maybe we do have to use Times New Roman because it's free and why not? So no cut and dry answer, but I mean, practice, just look up like good typographic inspiration on like Pinterest, Google, like see what's out there, be inspired by it, and then replicate it, but don't steal it.
For beginners who don't necessarily have a taste palette yet, what's the max number of fonts they should be using in the
2.
document?
Keep it
Guys,
simple.
you heard it here first. 2.
Or use one and go bold and not bold. I don't know.
Perfect. Bold and not bold. Do we have time for like 1 or 2 more questions? Oh, I love it. Come on up to the front.
There we go.
My middle name is Wayne. I was named after an uncle I never met.
Hi, my name is Augusto. My question is, well, I used to do design a long time ago, and then I just came back to start designing. And I remember back then, there were like font managers. Now, that I'm here in the new era of design, does that still exist? Like, or do you use a type of a font manager?
Like a specific individual that like,
There was an app, like an application that you would open and activate some fonts, and deactivates the fonts that you don't use anymore. Not anymore, but a computer would crash if you would have all of your fonts open. So I don't know if that's a thing nowadays.
I don't specifically use any apps like, yeah.
Okay. So probably just with the one that Apple uses, the font. what is it?
Font book? Is that what you're talking
Yeah.
about? Yeah.
Something similar. you would
Oh, okay.
activate and
Well,
make
I mean,
use
if
of
that's the
fonts.
case, like I do, like everything that is uploaded to like a MacBook, for instance, like it goes straight into FontBook. That's how Mac essentially says like this is
So probably
the
Mac
archive
just
of fonts,
got rid of,
essentially.
of those apps, maybe.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with like really because I've just been like hardcore Mac. I'm not familiar with any other. I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
I was useless.
Thank you. Kevin said sky fonts. Sky fonts, is that one word or two? One word, thank you so much, you heard it here. Also, I apologize for telling you about my middle name. I was trying to fill silence, and that was not good of me. One more
Wait,
question.
can I call you Lil
love it.
Wayne now?
Little Wayne?
Yeah.
Nope, I'm pretty tall.
Cool.
So I actually have 2 questions, but I'm one person, so is that okay? Cool.
I won't tell anybody, I promise.
Okay, so my first thing I want to ask is, where are some places that we could go to use fonts and not steal them?
Use them and not steal them. Well, it depends on the application because you use but don't steal. A lot of it comes down to licensing. Yeah, anything that's like preloaded. Yeah, yeah. Like if you have to license the font and you end up trying to kind of like tiptoe around that, find like a free version or something like that, like that free version could just be somebody else's alternative design that they tried to like mimic the letter forms exactly. I don't know. So yeah, it would just be a lot of like Google fonts. Yeah. Yeah. It's like yeah, you got to be careful with that. But there's a bunch of sites out there. There's like Font Fabric, Font Squirrel. I don't know, you name it. Just look up fonts and stuff like.
Thank you. Next, how do you manage your how do you balance your love for photography and the entrepreneurial side of it, which can make it stressful?
My love for, was it photography or typography?
Photography.
The love of photography combined with the entrepreneurial side of it.
Yeah, like how do you?
Essentially like the client-based aspect.
Right.
I am a client-serving individual, so even if I'm looking to create, if only for myself, I still think about my projects from a client perspective, because like people have been quoted in saying, really true creativity really only happens when there are strict guidelines and boundaries to essentially limit the number of potential outcomes, because then you have to really consider a lot more interesting routes, and that's where I'm actually able to properly make and create. So that's just kind of how I've trained myself. And a lot of that really started back in graphic design school, because graphic design is, generally speaking, a commercial art form, if that makes sense. Commercial being client serving, as opposed to just fine art, so to speak.
Thank you.
All right, thank you everybody for coming to our June Columbus Web Group meetup. Again, I want to give a big thanks to everybody who helped sponsor this, including Sean, including Kyle, especially Tech Elevator who got the space for us. I love you, Tech Elevator. I'm no longer depressed. I want to repeat, we will be going to Brazen Head afterwards for a good time. That's Brazen Head on?
Brazen Head
call
on
out,
Fifth.
Fifth Avenue. That's right, guys.
There we go.
Brazen Head on?
Fifth. Okay.
I love it. All right, so thank you guys again. For future meetups, including our social one in July and other talks in August and every month after, please check us out on meetup.com. Have a good night, be safe, stay in school, don't do drugs.
Well done. Thank you.